Well, good day, everyone, and this is not going to be too particularly long. Um, I want, I said it just before I started the show. When your lips get chappy, yeah, you always got to take care of them. And I try to take good care of my lips, which is why I prefer Burt's Bees, best chapstick in the world. Tastes the best too. Not that I advise going around eating chapstick or licking chapsticks, but the multitude of flavors that they have with Burt's Bees is delicious and makes wedding chapstick so much more endurable than that nasty taste that comes with Carmex. Well, let me get straight into it here. Before I get started talking about some of the issues that I have with uh, Biden's nominee, let me talk about some of the issues that I have at large with what's going on with the administration. Now, if you all have been following much of what we do and much of what we have been saying on the podcast, then what I'm going to say isn't going to sound too strange at all. And most people are fully aware that I am by no means a fan of Joe Biden or the liberal Democrats. But with what's actually going on with this administration and a lot of the major setbacks and issues, a lot of those things are starting to come up to the front because they're starting to persuade certain persons which have been uh, disallowing, so to speak, this rapid degeneracy of our society and societal structures. And much of that has to do with not so much Biden himself, um, as he's just an instrument that the liberal left is using in order to push forth much of this agenda. And, you know, I don't particularly need to have these on because I'm not interviewing anybody, so I don't really need to hear anything through my headset. But, and we might go to YouTube and share some audio and things of that nature. But most of the things that comes down to really comes down to the fact of the matter is that many of these policies and procedures could have been avoided decades ago, before even my mother was born. And my mother's in her 40s. And a lot of the issues that we face are largely due to the fact that this old generation, and I'm not blaming the problems of this generation on the older generation, but a lot of the problems that we face in today's society are largely predicated based upon the the issues which happened in the 50s and 60s, 70s and 80s, and all of those solutions to these problems were given to them during these particular decades, even prior to, as I have outlined uh, in several of the readings that I've been doing lately. As you can see, my lounge of books that I keep right next to my bedside, and I try to read a chapter a night. And some of these are are, are fiction, like for instance, this one by Barry and Lufin by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is really a very, very good book that gives more on some of the unfinished tales and the works of Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, which I also have the Silmarillion over there somewhere. Probably fell behind the bed since I go to sleep reading it so often. But also, I've got with me the Children of Húrin, who is another one of Tolkien's classics. Very good book, which I haven't actually started that one yet. The one that I started the most of Tolkien's works was Silmarillion and, of course, The Fall of Gondolin, which is perhaps the most important work in Silmarillion, because this is really what sets up the entire story of Lord of the Rings, which is The Fall of Gondolin. And some other things happen in Silmarillion. This one I haven't started yet either, but most people will recognize the face, Smark Levin, Ameritopia, The Unmaking of America, and I have not had the opportunity to read it yet. And it seems like it's going to be a really good book, and I'm going to be reading it. But more importantly, what I come to is this one. This book is an autobiography written by Frederick Douglass, a narrative on the life of Frederick Douglass and other key writings by Frederick Douglass. And reading through it, it opens up so many avenues and wide spectrums on Frederick Douglass's work. These are some of the key writings of Frederick Douglass, another one on Frederick Douglass and the life of Frederick Douglass. And it coincides with much of the work that's written in this book, which you guys have seen me hold up before. I'm going to turn off my background here because it's hard to show. No, blur the background. Yeah, let's blur my background. But it's hard to show these books when I've got my green screen going. If I had actual green screen where I could put it back here behind me, it'd make it so much easier to have that. But I've ordered two of them. I probably need to order three of them because I probably need to inbox myself in the green screen in order to make sure that everything's done and then have proper lighting sources. But I've ordered two, one to block this direction and the other one to go directly behind me, so it will be able to do a lot of the things I needed to do. Though I probably could just get by with one of the ones that I prop on the back of the chair and let it just go up really big, but that would still leave all of this space over here and over there because this camera picks up so much. And I'm planning on getting a new camera as well because I don't like this one much anymore. It did what its job was supposed to do, but it has horrible focusing issues. I look grainy a lot of the time, so for those reasons, I want to get another camera, one that's more high quality, able to catch me high def, and I don't look so grainy and so dark. I mean, you can see a lot of the exposure in this camera is abysmal. It doesn't really have a lot of lighting options. So I want to sort of fix those issues by getting another camera and working on that. But I bring up Frederick Douglass because a lot of the issues that are about to come forefront in the political scene are going to involve blacks. And one of the greatest things that has ever been said as it relates to blacks is said by Frederick Douglass. And that was said in a speech in 1865. And Frederick Douglass said, and I quote, Everybody has asked the question, and they learned to ask it early of the abolitionists. What shall we do with the Negro? I have but one answer from the beginning. Do nothing with us. Your doing with us has already played the mischief with us. Do nothing with us. If the apples will not remain on the tree of their own strength, if they are worm eaten at the core, if they are early ripe and disposed to fall, let them fall. I am not for trying to fasten them on the tree in any way except by nature's plan, and if they will not stay there, let them fall. And if the Negro cannot stand on his own legs, let him fall also. All I ask is give him a chance to stand on his own legs. Let him alone. If you see him on his way to school, let him alone. Don't disturb him. If you see him going to dinner to the dinner table at a hotel, let him go. If you see him going to the ballot box, let him alone. Don't disturb him. If you see him going into a workshop, just let him alone. Your interference is doing him a positive injury. And I mentioned that quote because what we have here in the Ketanji uh, Brown Jackson hearings is a prime example of affirmative action and political agendas being the sole reasoning for a nomination to the highest court in the land. And the sad part is that she will be appointed to the court. There's no stopping it because it does not take 60 votes any longer to pass such legislation, or let's not say legislations, but confirmations for Supreme Courts. It used to, but the Democrats changed that rule under the Obama era. And so it only requires a simple majority in order to get it done. So she will be the next Supreme Court, and she'll be on there for a long time. And the problem with that is so far in the answers in which she has given to the questions in which have been asked, she has proven to be remarkably underqualified and underwhelming. I was expecting to be blown away by levels of intellectual prowess and legal and judicial philosophy that far outshone any of the other justices, and it was wholly underwhelming. Now, I blame this largely in part on the half of the Democrats because, as far as I can tell, as far as I can see, the Democrats aren't interested in asking her any real questions. As a matter of fact, they haven't asked her any real questions, and so because of that, she only really gets to shine um, when Republicans are questioning her. And therein lies the issue. She is evasive to answering questions on which Republicans do ask. Something that we have not seen of the other nominees, of Neil Gorsuch, of Amy Coney Barrett, of Brett Kavanaugh. Um, we have not seen this evasiveness to answer simple questions. And a lot of people are saying, well, what sense does it matter for her to answer a question in relationship to sentencing when the Supreme Court doesn't sentence? Well, the Supreme Court does sentence. The Supreme Court sentences on the highest of crimes when things have been appealed or taken all the way to the Supreme Court, and are the only ones that can sentence members of Congress and members of the executive. That's their role. That's their authority. So yes, they do. Have they historically? No, but they absolutely have the ability and capability of doing so. And when she talks about uh, that these are the guidelines in which one should follow, and then goes on to ignore the guidelines completely, and in many cases, rule sentencing that far exceeds the minimum of set guidelines. For it goes to show that I don't believe she's ever been qualified to be a judge at all. She's more in line with an activist than she is with a judge, particularly when you're having cases involving child pornography and pedophilia, and you're giving 3 months when the minimum is 2 years in some states, and federally, Congress passed the minimum of 10 years some time ago, and you try to use the internet as a scapegoat, saying that there's a difference between possession and receiving, which I cannot see the difference in all. Because if you are in possession of child pornography, you're, in my opinion, even more so wrong than if you are receiving or consuming in child pornography. That being that you would have had some way of producing or procuring this possession in which you have. Yet, for those particular instances and cases, she chooses to sentence well beneath the mandated minimum. As I mentioned in one case, 3 months. And the massive recidivism rate in her district, where she has seen multiple of the same person before her multiple times, proves that her philosophy, her judicial philosophy, is a failure, because the entire point of sentencing, of punitive sentencing, is an act of deterrence. And if your recidivism rate is so excessive that you have seen the same person come before you in multiple times and in multiple cases, then it is abysmal to have this type of thing happen. And so I am very disappointed with what's going on. And give me 1 second. And so I'm very disappointed with what's going on with Miss Jackson. Her judicial philosophy has proven to be a failure, and in my case, has proven that she is underqualified, or at the very least, not qualified, based upon her mishandling of her role as a judge. Furthermore, people ask all the time, well, what is the point in reasoning of asking her questions as to relationship of the definition of a woman? Well, when you take a look at much of the authority of the Supreme Court, it is determining things as it relates to fairness under the Constitution, and particularly when it comes to women's rights and protected areas such as sports and things of that nature. The legal battles and legal challenges that are going to be arising as a result of many of these issues in which trans women are participating in women's sports is going to be something that will be brought to the Supreme Court. And the fact that she refuses to to define what a woman is shows that she has some ulterior motive as to the reasoning for doing that. And giving such an abysmal excuse that she's not a biologist. You don't have to be a biologist to be able to define what a woman is. A biologist does not make the determination to define what a woman is. That is something that is defined as soon as you are born. It's physiology. Sure, biologists can tell you some more of the ins and outs of the chemical makeup of a woman's body versus the chemical makeup of a man's body, but the fact of the matter is that those physical And biological differences do not change just because your physical appearance has changed. The inside of your body, your organs and chemical makeup does not change at all. And so there are going to be cases where she's going to have to interpret these things under the Constitution. And I have very little confidence that she's going to be able to do so in a way which is not heavily biased and geared towards the leftist ideology, which will completely destroy any idea of fairness that is had in these particular cases and these particular sports and instances in which women need to have their own spaces. And I think, while speaking on that, um, it only seems to happen in women's sports because I have not seen or heard of a case in which a trans man has tried to participate or break into uh, men's sports because men will completely dominate, and a trans man will never be able to even register as a potential threat in that industry. And more so, you're looking at many things in which used to be things that women were able to compete in, are they are now losing simply based off of virtue signaling. For instance, Woman of the Year is given to a trans woman. They're not even a real woman. So now you're telling women that a man can transition into a woman and become a better woman than you are. So, what is the purpose of you even trying to be the best when everything, every bit of equality that women have fought for is now completely swept under the rug because the left has a new goal, has a new agenda, and that goal and agenda is to focus solely on those who are on the left. Not on the left, but those who are trans or part of the LGBTQ community. And it is wholly unfair to women in women's sports and other women's activities. Uh, and it makes very little sense to rational people, to people who are reasonable. And particularly since the left has been claiming to champion science so hard, yet in the cases of biology and physiology, they completely reject science altogether. So how are you to say to me that this is what it's to be if you can't make up your mind as to whether you want to follow the science or reject the science? And then you wonder why people are confused when they are given uh, directives and advice by leftists. Another key issue that I have is Ketanji Brown's uh, answer when it comes to her experience of having to interpret things as it relates to constitutionality. The fact that she says that she has never had to do so is troubling to me because it shows unpreparedness uh, to interpret things on constitutionality, always referring to certain guidelines. Yet, as I already explained, she would rule well beneath the minimum of said guidelines, which, in my view, shows that she, in fact, does interpret constitutionality, but it was unwilling to say so because that she did so. As she did, she would have been admitting that she has gone against many of the constitutionality of the Constitution because it is not her authority to legislate from the bench. Yet, in many of her cases, that's exactly what she has done by ignoring the guidelines that is written by the legislature and ruling and sentencing beneath those guidelines. So there are several issues that I have with Miss Brown, and I could go on all day about those issues. But I wanted to talk about some other key issues. So tomorrow at 5 o'clock, we will be interviewing uh, Carl Boyanton yet again, and it's going to be more of a free form conversation, not going to be so driven driven based upon prescripted questions. Though I do have some questions from before which we did not get to that I will ask. But more importantly, I'm going to talk a lot about economy and about energy costs. As what intrigued me most about Carl Boyanton when he was on our show was his business practices and his knowledge in business. And that is what intrigued me the most because such business practice and business savvy is important to explain to the consumer base, which are us, the reasoning why rising cost of energy, rising cost of fuel causes everything else to increase in price. And one of the key issues that I see with Republicans and conservatives when they are trying to explain these issues to common folk is they always like to talk percentages. And percentages don't resonate with normal common day folk. People understand percentages, absolutely, but people are not going to the store and saying, well, when I came to the store last week, a pound of chicken was $5.99. This week it's $7.89. I just saw a 20% increase in the cost of chicken. People aren't doing that. What needs to happen if you want to resonate with people as a Republican or conservative and divvy out facts and numbers, you have to break things down beyond percentages because percentages can get bogged down because a percentage in one category that's 20% is completely different from a percentage in another category. For instance, 20% of the population of the United States is roughly 60 million. Okay? 20% of a $10 bill is $2. Very different scenarios where percentage means very little until you're talking about large generalizations of numbers. So, in order to better get those things across, I want to talk about numbers on a greater detail and be able to break that data down, which is one of the reasons why I went over to the library and I went and reviewed uh, a lot of the issues that I saw with the budget of Harrison County. Now I'm going to go over just a few things. I've got quite a few pages of it, and I still need to go back to the library and go and gather some more data. But I've got a few pages here, and I'm just going to go over the first page, maybe part of the second page. But this is some of the major issues that I have seen as it relates to this. So, as compared to the previous year's budget, 2021's annual budget for Harrison County, as far as revenues are concerned, is not. Uh, and the budget that we started with was $94,462. $94,462,135, as compared to 2022's budget total of $104,084,919, which has a gross difference of $9,622,784. Well, that is a massive jump going into 2022 than from 2021. When I went and reviewed the budget the first time, I got to go back and take a look at it again to make sure that I wasn't wrong. there was roughly $15 million that went unused. So uh, I would not be upset with this increase in the budget by $9 million, $9.6 million, if I didn't know that $15 million went unused. So looking at this mathematically, there is still roughly $6 million that is missing out of the 2022 budget for Harrison County. Another key issue that I found was the 2022 expenditures for the Board of Supervisors as compared to the 2021 expenditures, where in 2021 expenditures for the Board of Supervisors was $1,315,410. And going into 2022, we had a $1,581,740 expenditure, most of which was personal expenditures, meaning that our Board of Supervisors for Harrison County most likely received a pay raise of collectively around $266,330. Whereas when I took a look at, let me go over here. Uh, where was it? I see. Here we go. When I took a look at personnel for the County Board of Supervisors expenditures in 2020 to 2022, I seen that there was a marginal difference of around $6,000 negative, meaning that there were pay cuts to the personnel of 2022 versus 2021, where in 2021 the budget was $324,052, and in 2022 the budget was $319,343, which shows a difference of around $4,709, most of which is personal expenditure. So the Board of Supervisors gave themselves a more than quarter million uh, dollar raise of over $266,000, while at the same time slashing cost for their personnel. I found that very disappointing, particularly with the rising cost of inflation and due to COVID and the rising cost of living down here on the coast. Another key issue that I found, I'm going to skip over the Chancery Clerk, but one of the other major key issues that I found was in the tax assessor and the tax collector. Now, this is staggering to me. And the tax assessor and expenditures in 2022 was $2,061,441, and that's an increase of around $130,000 from 2021. But what's more so was the tax collector, whereas 2021 was an expenditures of over 1.7 million. As a matter of fact, it was $1,796,017, whilst in 2022 the expected budget expenditures to be $2,302,655. That's an over $500,000 increase for tax collector. For tax collectors, over over a $500,000 increase for tax collectors, and most of which the expenditures go towards personal expenses. I can't think of any personal expenses that a tax collector would need that cost over $2.5 million. Good job to get into if this is the annual raise that you are expected to see of over $500,000, the highest paid in the county. It's a tax collector. Then in the county administrator, strangely enough, only the personal services increased. That when I say that, I look here, there's a $25,000 increase going from 2022 to 2021. There was absolutely no change in uh, any of the cost except for personal services. It was $474,428 and grew to $506,959 in 2022. And there has been no change except for personal services, meaning that they were given a raise of $25,000 and literally nothing else changed. No office supplies, no nothing, because office supplies and all of those things are counted in the expenditures, and you have to go to the library and take a look at those things if you really want to get down into the nitty gritty. But when you take a look at these numbers and take a look at the budget and what they allocate, for instance, for veterans, you were not even giving them $75,000 in veteran services here in the county, and it's things like that I think you really have to go down and break down the numbers, not percentage values, but the numbers in order to really get people to grasp what's going on here. Show people where this money is going to and how it's being directed. And you'll begin to see a change in the way people vote, because people vote with their dollar and with their voice, more so with their dollar than they do with their voice, and to be in all honesty. So I found a lot of major issues. Um, One of the things that I find uh, that I love so much about this book is the idea of good intentions. Uh, as a matter of fact, I'm going to share something on YouTube here if I can find it. Let me take a listen to this and see if this is it. If it is, I'm going to share it with you guys. Yeah, this is a good one, but it's not the one that I was looking for. But I'm going to share it anyway because I think it's relatively important. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. I'm going to share my system audio, and we're going to go to this tab right here. Boom. And let's see. Let's go ahead and take a look at this.
Minimum wage lowers the costs of racial discrimination. Let me just give you an example. There's a very nice book written in 1989 called South Africa's War Against Capitalism, and its author is Walter Williams. I did a study of labor markets in South Africa, and it turns out that in South Africa during the apartheid era in the 70s, 80s, the major supporters for minimum wages for blacks were white, racist labor unions that would never have a black as a member. Now, why do you think they were arguing for minimum wages for blacks? Well, it's very easy. Let's say a white laborer on a construction project is getting $5 an hour, and a poor, discriminated black doing the same work would be willing to work for $1 an hour. What do you think employers are going to do? Well, one guy will work for $5 an hour, and here's another guy who says, I'm going to work for $1 an hour. Well, the employer has the incentive to hire the $1 an hour guy. So how can you discourage the employer from hiring the $1 an hour guy? Well, you just eliminate the $1 an hour. You say you get a law passed that the employer must pay $5 an hour no matter whom he hires. Matter of fact, in all of my research, I show that the minimum wage is one of the most effective tools in the arsenal of racists everywhere in the world. Now, you'll say to me, well, look, Walter, labor unions in the United States, they don't feel that way. Well, it doesn't make any difference whether labor unions feel that way. That is, the intentions are irrelevant to the effects. That is, somebody could push me off the Empire State Building, or I could trip. It doesn't make any difference why I went off the top of the building. It has no effect on the law of gravity. Intentions have no effect on economic outcomes.
Now that's important because the fact that you talk about intentions as it relates to economic outcome is extremely important, because the truth be told, the intentions and the effects, as Walter Williams has said, have no relevancy or correlation to one another other than the effects are often what the true intention was to begin with. And Walter talks about that at great length in his book here. And I want to play another one. This one's too long, but I recommend watching this one in its entirety. It's very good, very educational. But I want to watch this one. This one's really good. This one's good too, but it's going to cover pretty much the same thing in this one. So let's take a look. Let's take a listen.
Most people in this town view the state and a lot of the government programs and taxation programs as aiding minorities and especially blacks. And you're making the argument in your writings for 30, 40 years and in your book that in fact policies like the minimum wage, the expansion of the welfare state have actually been a setback for minorities. How do you defend yourself against your critics?
Well, if you look at the minimum wage, most Americans support the minimum wage and increase in the minimum wage because they have good intentions. They think that, gee, it will help low-skilled people earn higher living. But when you look at public policy, you should not look at the intentions behind public policy. You should ask the question, what are the effects? And you can see the effect of the minimum wage law if you put yourself in the place of an employer. And you say, and you have to pay $7.25 an hour no matter whom you hire. Well then, would you hire a worker who is so unfortunate so as to have skills that would only enable him to produce $3 or $4 worth of value per hour? Well, most employers will look at that as a losing economic proposition. That is to pay somebody $7.25 when that somebody could only produce $4 worth of value per hour. And so the effect of the minimum wage law is to discriminate against the employment of low-skilled people. And if you look at
wait a minute, those are the people who are going to get the minimum wage.
No, they're not going to get a job in the first place. That is, there's the lowest skilled people, the employer just will not hire them. Now, in the absence of a minimum wage law, if he could pay them $3 or $4 an hour, $5 an hour, well, they could be employed and they would learn something on the job. They get on the job training and ultimately be worth $7.25 or even more than that. So what the minimum wage law does, it cuts off the bottom rungs of the economic ladder. And if you look for the empirical evidence of this, you just look at our labor force, and you see that the unemployment rate among teenagers is the greatest, is the highest. And teenagers are low skilled because they lack the experience, the maturity, and other attributes of adults. And among that group are black teenagers who not only share the handicaps of teenagers in general, but they share the additional handicaps of often going to rotten schools, getting fraudulent education, poor backgrounds, rotten neighborhoods, and early work experiences are very, very important for people who have this kind of background. Now, there's something else about the minimum wage law that nobody considers, and I point that out in a book I wrote in 1989. It's called South Africa's War Against Capitalism. And in that book, I do a study of labor markets in South Africa during its apartheid era. And I give citation after citation of racist unions in South Africa who would never have a black as a member, were the major supporters of minimum wage laws for blacks. And their stated reason was to make the wage high enough so that employers would not hire black workers, they would hire white workers. So it turns out that the minimum wage is the most effective tool in the arsenal of racists everywhere in the world. And let me just give one more example on minimum wage law. The first minimum wage law in our country was the Davis-Bacon Act of 1931. Yes. And the Davis-Bacon Act says that
you can read about the Davis-Bacon Act here, or you can read about the Davis-Bacon Act here. This is a copy of the Constitution and other key American writings, and the Davis-Bacon Act is here in this key writing. There we go, in 1887. And so you get to have a lot of these key writings here outlined. So the Davis-Bacon Act, I read pretty good length here in this book about the Davis-Bacon Act. And let me read to you what the Davis-Bacon Act is before I continue playing, so that you can get pretty much garner a little bit more about what he was saying, because he isn't going through his entire book in this thing, but because he's researched it for so long, he doesn't have to. So listen here to the effects of the Davis-Bacon Act. I want to read over it here. If I can find it, here it is. The Davis-Bacon Act. This Kansas in 1891 was the first state to establish what has become known as prevailing wage laws. The law read that not less than the current rate of per diem wages in the locality where the work is performed shall be paid to laborers, workmen, mechanics, and other persons so employed by or on behalf of the state of Kansas. In 1894, New York became the second state to enact a prevailing wage law. Samuel Gompers, president of the American Federation of Labor, led the political charge of both states and later called for a federal prevailing wage law. The impetus for a law at the federal level began in 1927 when an Alabama contractor successfully won a bid on a government contract to build a Veterans Bureau hospital on Long Island. Ethelbert Stewart, Commissioner of Labor Statistics, said a contractor from a southern state secured a contract to build a government marine hospital, as I remember it, on Long Island. He brought with him an entire outfit of Negro laborers from the South. In response to the Alabama contractor's underbidding of his local counterparts, New York Representative Robert Bacon submitted H.R. 17069, a bill to require contractors and subcontractors engaged on public works of the United States to comply with state laws relating to hours of labor and wages of employment on state public works. So, if you didn't understood what that actually did, what that said was is because the Alabama contractor from the South brought with him Negroes to the North, which were willing to do this work for a fraction of the cost that white workers were willing to do this work. The Alabama contractor was always going to get the contract because he was able to do it for less pay. So he was always able to get the job when other sole white employers were unable to do so. So the entire proposition for this bill to be introduced in the first place was to price blacks out of the market so that whites could procure these contracting positions as it relates to some of these jobs. Now, as I continue to read, I'm only going to read the next 2 pages of this, and, and then I'm going to get back uh, to Walter Williams. So this is still Walter Williams. It's his book. He wrote it out for his studies. So between 1927 and 1930, Congress introduced at least 14 bills to regulate wages on public work projects. And as the Depression deepened, Congress's unwillingness to interfere with private employment contracts changed. By 1931, understand what happened in 1930. That was the election of perhaps the most intrusive president as it relates to private business practices and the market as a whole on American life, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt had all the intentions of helping the community, but those intentions were misplaced. Anyways, let me continue. By 1931, construction industry wages had fallen by one half, and 700,000 construction workers became unemployed as construction projects fell by 70% between 1929 and 1933. Congressmen received numerous complaints that contractors were bidding wages down and employing internet uh, itinerants to replace local workers. The wave of employment together with resulting complaints ultimately strengthened the hand of the unions pressing for the enactment of the prevailing wage law at a federal level. In support of Senator Bacon's bill, Representative William Upshaw of Georgia complained of the superabundance or large aggregation of Negro labor, which he had characterized as a problem you are confronted with in any community. In response to Bacon's description of his district's hospital situation, Upshaw remarked, "You will not think a Southern man is more than human if he smiles over the fact that of or he smiles over the fact of your reaction to the real problem of the you are confronted with in any community with superabundance or aggregation of Negro labor." To which Bacon replied, "I just mentioned the fact because that was the fact in this particular case, but the same would be true if you would bring a lot of Mexican laborers or if you brought any non-union laborers from any other state." Finally, after 13 additional similar bills had been submitted, one co-sponsored by Representative Bacon and Pennsylvania Senator James J. Davis passed on March 31st of 1933. It mandated the payment of locally prevailing wage and benefits on all federally financed or assisted construction projects that exceeded $5,000, reduced to $2,000 4 years later. Now I'll skip over and take a look at the effects of the David Bacon Act. I'm only going to read the first uh, the first two paragraphs here because it's a lot, and I want to get back to this video. So the Davis-Bacon exemplifies collusion between the seller or the labor and contractors, buyers, on federal construction projects to ensure payment to workers of a minimum or prevailing wage. The Secretary of Labor determines that prevailing wage according to various formulas. One study found that over 90% of the determinations equaled the union rate in the area, although non-union work accounted for large fractions of construction workers. Another study showed that the Davis-Bacon determinations are 4% higher than average wages in commercial construction and 9% higher in residential construction. As a more recent survey found that Davis-Bacon wage determinations were 15 to 40% higher than market wages. For example, Davis-Bacon wages for a carpenter in New York ranged between $34 and $40, while market wage was around $24. In practice, and contrary to the Davis-Bacon prevailing wages, are determined by the Department of Labor to be the union wage in the area or higher, and therefore have been useful to building trade unions and preventing minimum wage competition below these minimums. The Act's wage and work jurisdiction requirement make it costly for non-union shops to hire and train unskilled workers because they had to pay workers wages and benefits that exceeded worker productivity. Initially, the Act's regulations did not make a distinction between skilled unskilled and skilled workers unless the former were members of a union apprenticeship program. As a result, contractors were forced to pay a worker who was not a member of such a program the same wage as a skilled worker. So, one of the many examples that he had given was, for instance, this. This is on the causes of the the Davis-Bacon exclusion. So the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, finances housing rehabilitation programs. Since they are federally funded, the programs come under the jurisdiction of the Davis-Bacon Act. Mary Nelson, the director of Bethel New Life Inc., a Chicago-based local service organization, founded that Davis-Bacon adds as much as 25% to her housing renovation costs. It frequently costs her it frequently prevents her from hiring the low-income, low-skilled residents to do the rehabilitation work in the housing project in which they live. L.Z. Higginbottom builds low-income housing in Chicago. In order to comply with the provisions of the Davis-Bacon Act, he must pay carpenters defined by the Department of Labor uh, as anyone who hammers a nail, $23 an hour. Higginbottom says, I've got to start out a guy at $16 an hour to find out if he knows how to dig a hole. I can't do that. As a result, he is prevented from hiring unskilled local blacks. Ralph L. Jones, the president of a company that managed housing projects for HUD, uh, said when Jones decided to repair 200 dilapidated units, he planned to employ unskilled residents at $5 an hour to pull out unsalvageable parts of the building, and later assisted skilled crafts and later to assist skilled craftsmen in restoring the property. However, the Davis-Bacon Act required that he pay laborers $14 an hour. He was forced to hire only skilled workers, very few of whom were black or residents of the project. This is the Davis-Bacon Act, and the intentions of the Davis-Bacon Act were to price blacks out of the market. But these are the very same prevailing wage laws in which blacks today and the liberal Democrats today are fighting so hard to make legal. They're fighting so hard to get you to pay somebody $15 an hour But they're not telling you what the ulterior motive is for that. The ulterior motive is they're trying to price somebody out of the market so that only the people whom they deem to be qualified for such jobs can be employed, meaning that only those people who have a college degree will be considered skilled enough in order to get a job. So those persons who have only a high school diploma will be completely priced out of the market and have to wind up falling back on welfare programs in order to be able to sustain themselves, because no employer is going to hire somebody who doesn't have a college degree if they have to pay them $15 an hour. They're just not going to, because they don't have the skills necessary to determine or deem that they are worth $15 an hour. And that's just the facts. So let's continue.
That all workers in federally funded or federally assisted construction projects must be paid the prevailing wage. And if you look on page 6513 of the Congressional Record on March 31st, 1931, you'll see congressional testimony where congressmen will say, see that contractor over there? He brings cheap colored labor up from the South, puts them in cabins, and it's labor of that sort that has to compete, that white Americans are competing against. It was all kinds of testimony in support of the Davis-Bacon Act that demonstrated that they wanted to keep blacks out of construction. Wow. And see, the tragedy of it is that the Davis-Bacon Act is still on the books today. And another part of the tragedy is that black congressmen, they also support the Davis-Bacon Act. Now, they support the Davis-Bacon Act because unions want the Davis-Bacon Act. Now, the people who support the Davis-Bacon Act today, they just don't use the same rhetoric. They use a more enlightened rhetoric in support of the Davis-Bacon Act. But the minimum wage law, any kind of minimum or any kind of regulation on prices, it discriminates against less preferred people. I mean, if you ask the question, and one example I frequently give talking about setting prices, any kind of price control, it discriminates against less preferred people. I often ask people, suppose you saw a fat, old, ugly, cigar-smoking man, and he's married to a beautiful young lady. What kind of prediction would you make about that man's income? You would guess that it's pretty high. And what is he doing? He's telling the beautiful young lady, look, I can't compete for your hand on the basis of a guy like Williams. So I'm going to offset my handicap by offering you a higher price. And so decent people might say, well, gee, is it fair for beautiful young ladies to treat fat, old, ugly, cigar-smoking men any differently than they treat handsome men? And they'll say no. And then you make a law saying that beautiful young ladies can't charge fat, old, ugly, cigar-smoking men higher prices than they charge handsome men. Then you say, well, then what happens to the probability of a fat, old, ugly, cigar-smoking man marrying a beautiful young lady? What you've done by regulating prices, you've taken away his most effective means of competing with the more preferred man by offering higher prices. And so that's the same thing when you regulate any price. You handicap less preferred people.
So if Jesse Jackson were here, or some of the more liberal economists, they would respond to what you're saying by saying, well, look, maybe some people will lose their jobs. But, you know, if you look at the statistics, a disproportionate share of the people who get minimum wage are blacks and Hispanics, minorities. Mm-hmm. And Walter Williams, you are denying these people a pay raise. And then they would ask you, and I want you to respond to this, they'd say, well, Walter Williams, do you want no minimum wage? I mean, should there be no minimum wage that you could pay someone 50 cents a dollar? You're just going to drive those wages down to the least common denominator.
Well, first of all, that would be untrue, but I would answer the question, yeah, I would want no minimum wage, because what the minimum wage law does, I believe in people's right to contract, mm-hmm. and be able to engage in peaceable voluntary exchange, mm-hmm. at mutually beneficial or mutually agreeable terms. And the minimum wage law interferes with that. And matter of fact, the courts for a long time in the United States held that same position, that the minimum wage law violated the right of contract. And you look at the Children's Hospital versus Atkins case, and where the court said that it violated the freedom of contract. And it wasn't until the 1938, I believe, is West Coast Hotel versus Parish, I believe. That's the case where the court eventually said, well, gee, the minimum wage law is constitutional. But however, they were under threat of Roosevelt packing the court. So it was they say sometimes the switch in time that saved none.
Right.
And so I believe that people have the right to negotiate. And then also, a lot of people say the minimum wage law is an anti-poverty device. It reduces poverty. Well, that doesn't even pass the smell test. I mean, because if it were an anti-poverty device, rather than our spending all these millions and billions of dollars in foreign aid, we just tell Bangladesh and Haiti, you could be rich like we are, just have a higher minimum wage. That's just utter nonsense. And then also, the empirical evidence on the minimum wage law, in 1948, the unemployment rate among black teenagers was 9.4%.
1948.
1948. The unemployment rate among white teenagers was like 10.2.
It was lower.
It was lower.
Lower for blacks than whites.
Yeah, and the labor force participation rates for black teenagers were greater than white teenagers. Matter of fact, it was 106%. And so you say, well, how come in 1948? Was there less discrimination? Is that why? Or were blacks more in 1948 higher skilled than whites? No, it was the minimum wage law.
Okay, so that was more about the minimum wage law, but you're seeing that intentions do not mean much. What actually winds up mattering is what you actually do, the effects, so to speak. And that's really it. That's really it. So, I listen to a lot of things as it relates to this issue. Um, this one, oh man, I don't want to just sit here and watch videos of you guys all night, but this one is one of my favorites. And let's watch this one, and then I'm going to give a little bit more commentary on some issues, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So let's listen to this one. This is Fire Line by
Our examiner
William F. Buckley
is well known
Jr.
to regular viewers of this
A
program.
very good one.
He is as distinguished as a left-wing economist can hope to become. Professor Robert Cashman teaches at Lehman College. He is at the University of New York. He is the author of a number of...
I would love for us to be able to have shows like this on television today and be able to have such peaceful discourse with the other side, but clearly the left is not interested in doing so. And it's a shame because you're able to learn so much more when you are able to look at things in this regard.
books, including Greed is Not Enough.
Nothing has separated the Jewish and the black community more.
And this is a much longer program. It's actually over an hour long, but we're only looking at about 14 minutes of it, as this is talking about affirmative action. And Thomas Sowell goes into many of the issues of affirmative action. And this goes back to the issue and problem that I have with Ketanji Brown Jackson and several other blacks and several other key persons that are in positions of power within these current administrations, because they're put solely in there because they check a box and nothing else is considered. Their skills and qualifications come second to the check mark that they put in the box as it relates to their race, sexual orientation, gender, or what other otherisms they may have. And that is the problem of affirmative action. And it completely disqualifies most of these people of ever been qualified from the beginning. And in many cases, when some of these people get in there, it's and they're actually based off of merit, lots of people will look at it and say that they were only chosen because of the affirmative action. And that takes away from the value and hard work that many of these people who are actually well qualified have. And that's the biggest issue and problem with affirmative action. And Thomas Sowell is going to do a much better job of explaining that than I am. So let's take a listen.
Last generation than this issue of affirmative action, which for critical Jews invariably is termed quotas rather than affirmative action.
Well, they're different.
What?
They are different.
They are different. Let me, in fact, suggest this as a hypothesis. I'd be interested in your comment. Has there not been, throughout our history, a whole set of formal, informal, affirmative actions for white males, for Episcopalians, for graduates of Ivy League colleges, pardoning your presence, Mr. Buckley, has there not, in fact,
Why not him?
in clubs, I suppose, I'm not sure whether I should include myself. I went to Columbia.
Oh, yes.
What about clubs like the Century Association in this city, the Bohemian Grove, the Duquesne Club, the various clubs which are engaged in affirmative action for limited groups of their own members? In all of these clubs, important business is transacted to the benefit of the members and to the exclusion of people who are not members. We've had affirmative action of all kinds in this country addressed to the interest of the stronger groups. Now, comes a moment in our history when affirmative action, for a bit, is advanced for the benefit of groups which have been traditionally at the short end of the distribution of good things in our society. And there is considerable revulsion against it. Isn't this just a bit of historical justice that's being established?
I'm afraid I simply do not see the justice in making people who are badly off worse off in the name of advancing them.
You contrast the black experience in the 1960s and the 1970s. Well, now if I were to interpret the difference, I'd be inclined to point to certain phenomena, notably the oil shock in 1973, the second oil shock in 1979, the sharp recession in 74, 75, another recession in 79, 80. And in fact, what this suggests to me is that the gains of affirmative action are extraordinarily precarious if you run an economy at low levels of activity. That, of course, affirmative action isn't enough by itself. It would be foolish for anybody, even on my side of the issue, to argue that. But I would suggest to you that it's a bad comparison, because the 60s were a period of expansion with or without affirmative action, given the presence of the 1965 Civil Rights Act, given the 1954 Brown decision, and the general climate of opinion, opportunities for minority communities and a majority community, women.
Question, Mr. Cashman?
What?
Question, please.
Well, yes, I will come to a question. It's always possible to put speeches into question form. In fact, do you really think, these considerations taken into mind, that the 70s disproved the efficacy of affirmative action?
I think that when one makes a profound change in a society, arousing enormous passions across the board, that the burden of proof should be on those who think that this is beneficial. Because I have been listening very carefully, and you have yet to hear the benefit to disadvantaged blacks. that has been empirically discovered after affirmative action. I think that when one makes a profound change in a society, arousing enormous passions across the board, that the burden of proof should be on those who think that this is beneficial. Because I have been listening very carefully, and you have yet to hear the benefit to disadvantaged blacks that has been empirically discovered after affirmative action.
Well, how quickly do you expect the changes? You know, we're impatient as a people. In fact, as I understand one of
Well,
your...
we've had dramatic changes in the other direction, Mr. Cashman. For instance,
Oh,
the
but
number,
I attribute them
the,
to other causes, you
the
say.
sex.
I attribute the effects to other causes, largely to the economic disorders of the 1970s. The problems have been of long standing in our society. The remedy of affirmative action is a novel one. The University of California, when it presented an affirmative action plan, proposed to make about half a dozen women and blacks full professors in about 20 years, as I recall the program.
There were various fractions of people who would have become things in various periods of time.
Various what?
Various fractions. They would add 3.5 more women and things like that. And I was always fascinated. I had some suggestions of the people I thought would be right for the 0.5, but these suggestions were not well received. No, but it's fascinating that I see this happening in all sorts of issues, from Federal Reserve policies on across the board, that you say, here's this wonderful program, and it will do wonderful things. And the burden of proof is on others to show that it will not do those things. And no matter how long it's been going on,
It's not long enough.
it's never long enough. If it failed, there just wasn't enough commitment. The budget wasn't big enough, should have had a larger staff, wider powers. But there is never any sense of a burden of proof on you to say, when you've made this change that has caused such furor in this country and has gotten people at each other's throats, including people who have been allies in the past, such as blacks and the Jews, there is never any sense of a need for you to advance the empirical evidence to support what you've been doing.
Oh, on the contrary, Dr. Sal, I'm perfectly willing to have other people collect empirical evidence. That's not my bag. But I'm perfectly happy to subject the affirmative action policies to reasonable statistical evaluation, given a sufficient period.
Well, what is a sufficient? Because you said for a bit, and now we talk about a sufficient period, and I have difficulty with these. What temporal units are we talking about?
I would say
centuries, decades.
I would think of 20 to 25 years as a reasonable period, because we're talking, after all, among other things, about the progress of just hired law firm associates up to the grandeur of partners.
Wait, most blacks are not about to become law firm associates. The real problem is the kid in the South Bronx who has a tough time getting his first job as an unskilled worker because the employer is scared to hire him, because if he doesn't work out and he fires him, he may have to deal with the NAACP, with the EEOC, and God knows who else.
Oh, I have so...
One of the massive issues that came from this, and the reason why you see such high unemployment numbers for blacks. Why take the risk of hiring a black if for any reason a black feels slighted or feels that they aren't being paid justly, which in many cases they are being paid worth the skills that they have? Why take the risk in doing so when at any time, for any reason or no reason at all, a black can simply claim racism, and then now you're in a massive scandal, massive lawsuit, and whether or not you win the suit, your company will have lost prestige and money as a result, because as we have seen, facts clearly do not matter to these people on the left. They will burn a company down to the ground simply for the accusation, regardless of whether the facts are in the favor of the claimant or the employer. So these particular issues and cases are always going to cause problems for blacks, for anybody that is subject to affirmative action. And it doesn't stop at the low level. It goes up into the high levels where, as I said before, you have many cases where these people are being dropped in high level positions in which they do not qualify for or may qualify for, solely due to the fact that they have checked a box on a form. and that's the only thing that qualifies them to move on to the next stage of pre-screening, is that they subscribe to some particular identity, and that is enough to get them through the next stage of the interview process. What an abysmal way to pick people. You are uh, completely ignoring people who may have better qualifications, who may have much more experience, who may uh, do a much better job in pushing your agenda or other things. Not saying that Supreme Court justices need to be pushing any agendas, but who may very well be significantly better than the person that you have chosen, simply because they do not fit the box that you are looking for. And that is a problem. Let's go on.
I have so simple a remedy for that, Mr. Sal.
Oh,
I'm
this is
happy to
wonderful.
share it.
What is it?
All we need to do is to revert to the goals of the Humphrey Hawkins Balanced Growth and Full Employment Act.
Gee,
And then
why didn't I
employ-
think of that?
Well, that's because you were tired from talking earlier. But if in fact we ran the economy at very high levels of employment, employers would be less picky, less choosy, as they were during the Second World War. I don't advocate World War III as a solution to the problem,
Good.
but it is nevertheless.
Shall I answer the Humphrey Hawkins thing? What Humphrey Hawkins represents is doing what we've done in the public schools, promoting people along just because of, it's time for them to be promoted or passed along. And now, instead of confining this to the educational system, in which it's been a total disaster, we're now going to extend this into the marketplace so that people will be hired regardless of other kinds of considerations and passed along. That at no point will they be forced to meet any kind of standards.
Portugal has Humphrey Hawkins.
Do they?
And the highest per capita debt in the world.
Well, let me
All
hark
in
back.
9 years. They didn't even take 25 years.
I see.
Let me hark back to World War II, where I have the advantage of chronological antiquity to help
Not
me.
that
I can
much, really.
recall it. The fact is that during the Second World War, 13 million people were in uniform, I among them by invitation of a group of my neighbors. And at the same time as we supported a massive military effort, we actually improved the civilian standard of life during the Second World War. Now, how did we do it? We drew into the labor force all kinds of people who had been regarded as unemployable for assorted reasons, good and indifferent, bad perhaps. But it turned out that when there was a shortage of people, instead of a shortage of jobs, employers became ingenious.
All right, let me take that point, you see, because I have made the argument, you see, that the minimum wage law tends to make it tougher for minorities to be employed. Then, by extension, one would say, conversely, a maximum wage law would make it easier. And what we had in World War II was a maximum wage law. And therefore, we had price and wage controls, and therefore we had a chronic shortage of labor across the board. And under those conditions, women, minorities, etc., were hired in unusual rates. So I'm happy to see you agreeing with the paradigm that I was taught at Chicago, that indeed the number of jobs and people and so forth are all functions of price.
Chicago has had a malignant influence.
Not nearly as much as it should have.
It's also true that after the war, there were 9% black teenagers unemployed. Now that figure is more like 40%. And that's supposed to be after 40 years of progress under your system.
Given a choice, would you rather have
Now, after Mr. Buckley said that, and the gentleman here went on to say that that wasn't under his system. I really do encourage you to watch the entire thing. It's called this one. This was particularly, I think it was called "On the Law of Economic Minorities," and there's so much going to it. Like I said, it's over 50 minutes, and There's so much detail that goes on with this, and you can learn so much by listening to some of these things. And this took place before my mother was born. So all of these answers and solutions have been present for decades. Yet here we are today, still with the same answers that were presented decades ago, and we still have people siding with persons like this gentleman and still siding on these particular things, still doing the same things and getting worse results as a factor as a of their misplaced intentions. And so far, since we've only been doing their system, we have continued to grow progressively worse until we reach a point at which we will have a point of no return. And this is the reason why it has become so difficult to progress and move forward in our society, because nobody will ever stop and try the other solution. If it fails, we move on to something else. But don't continue to try the same thing over and over again, 15 different ways, all with the same outcome, and claim that the other side has offered no solutions when they have been telling you a solution for decades, for generations, and you just refuse to give them the credit where it is due.
Private price setters or public price setters in markets which are less than competitive.
Well, since I have not seen these enormous numbers of private price setters that you and Professor Galbraith have been discovering for so many years, despite having read your books on this subject, I really have nothing to compare.
Well,
Where I see prices set, I see them set by the government.
only? Really?
Occasionally a few electrical contractors get together and they end up,
But it's against the law.
It's against the law. I think it ought to stay against the law.
How
We
do
call
you-
it criminal.
That's right. That's right. I mean, we have laws against murder, but murders take place anyway.
How do you interpret the behavior of the major automobile producers in 1979 and 1980? Dreadful sales years. In both of those years, General Motors and its colleagues raised automobile prices. This is not how they do it on 7th Avenue when the garment business is bad.
I am tempted to say that after 25 years of that, I'll be happy to give you my answer, since presumably this is the magic number from which we do our empirical studies. And that, like you, I haven't bothered to keep up with the automobile industry. And
I'll wait 25 years for you if you'll wait 25 years
Oh, it'll
for
be
me.
a wonderful, it's something to look forward to.
Well, I think one obvious commentary is that a lot of fewer people bought cars. And also there was automatic indexation of wages.
Yes, I must say the thing that Galbraith strikes me as his theories in general as showing the utter imperviousness to empirical data. That the affluent society told us that we reached a level of affluence at which income distribution questions were no longer going to be important. We then ended upon a quarter of a century of the most intense interest in income distribution questions in the history of the United States. He informed us about the industries of the country, that now we had corporations that were immortal and that really didn't obey the rules laid down in such terrible places as Chicago because they were invulnerable to the marketplace.
Half of them went bankrupt.
W.T. Grant got wiped out. The Graflex Corporation used to supply 80% of all press cameras. They are now nowhere to be seen on the landscape. Neither would Chrysler be anywhere on the landscape but for the intervention in which so many liberals joined. Empirical evidence does matter.
It does. I see less of it than you do.
I'm willing to believe that because you've said so. I've been asking you for it and I haven't gotten any of it. So I'm perfectly willing to agree with you on that.
But
Gentlemen, we have one.
Tim Sewell is an absolute savage when it comes to these quips, and they do it with such class, and they're able to take it on the chin. Sometimes you don't see today in modern debates. It's hard to see this level of class and character, and actual data be tossed back and forth. Feelings is the only thing that so many people care about. When the facts care nothing for your feelings. They only care about the results. And that's all that matters, is the reality. Feelings mean nothing. You have to be able to produce results and results that work in the advancement of human society as opposed to its detriment. And that's all that feelings causes is detriment. Now, it is not to say that you do not take into account a person's feelings when you make a decision, but your decision should not be regulated by one's feelings. Your decision should be regulated by the facts of what your decision's effects may be on said person's feelings.
Minute.
The major piece of empirical evidence that I think you've cited this hour has really been the contrast between the 60s and the 70s.
No, it's been the contrast between
suggested
well-off people and badly off people. And that's true in other countries as well, that in Malaysia, where they've had affirmative action for the same amount of time, it's had the same results. It has done nothing for the poor Malays. The lowest level of Malays receive a smaller percentage of all the income received by Malays today than before this program was put into effect, as is true of blacks in the United
Is
States.
it worthless to do something for anybody but the very poor?
I would like to see the well-off take care of themselves. If they can't, who can?
Thank you very much, Professor Cashman. Thank you very much, Professor Thomas Sowell.
I could go on and listen to these things forever because they're so informative. Dr. Thomas Sowell's a great person. Milton Friedman is absolutely brilliant. Dr. Walter E. Williams, the late Dr. Walter E. Williams, who's passed away a couple of years ago, is brilliant. Yes, here's one of the actual clips that you can take a look at. The economic lot of minorities. If you want to see that whole thing in its entirety, it's there. You can also look at the economics of politics and race. This is the one that we just finished watching. This one is with where the observer is Mrs. Pupel. This is her right here, as you can see, and very good information. And there were more, but it's hard to find many of the older ones. You continue to see several different publications of the economic lot and minorities, but Thomas Sowell appeared on so much more episodes of Fireline than just these two. And YouTube doesn't have a lot of them. As you can see, this here was on welfare. On that one, you know what? I got time for one more. This one's a short one. And so let's listen to this one because it's important because it faces a lot of the issues. So actually, we'll listen to this one and this one because both of these are important for the issues that are facing Black America. So let's take a listen to this one.
What the welfare system and other kinds of governmental programs are doing is paying people to fail. Insofar as they fail, they receive the money. Insofar as they succeed, even to a moderate extent, the money is taken away. This is even extended into the school.
So this is talking about the reason why the welfare system has completely destroyed lower income communities, particularly Black communities, because you are forcing them to be reliant and dependent upon government. As I often said, you're constantly forcing them to suck the titty of the government. And the government has to supply them with all their needs for nourishment. And when they are threatened, or it's not, I won't say threatened, when they seek betterment, they are faced with the threat of losing said benefits, and this discourages them from being able to move forward to something that's better. Because, for instance, some percentage of 80% of the housing down here on the coast, or 80% of the apartments in affordable housing are price shared by the government and marketed as such. And so they are on a restricted income basis. And so if you uh, make within a certain amount of income, then you are able to rent that place. But if you should take a job that will pay you above that amount, you run the risk of losing your home. because you no longer fall within that price range, and now you have to go find someplace else. So in order to prevent you having to go through the moving out and things of that nature, you will never seek to advance your position, because now if you do, you'll be penalized for it and potentially wind up losing your home as a result. And you'll wind up losing your uh, your food stamps and other uh, welfare assistance programs, simply because you decided to better yourself and get a higher paying job, or get a skill that can afford you to be hired at a higher pay rate than would somebody else for the same work if they had lesser qualifications or lesser skills than you. These are the problems inherent to the welfare system, which are almost coinciding with the affirmative action policy. So I want to continue this one.
School systems where they will give money to schools with low scores. Insofar as the school improves its education, the money is taken away, so that you are subsidizing people to fail in their own private lives and become more dependent upon the handouts.
We have expectations built in today about the quality of life, the quality of job, the level of income for which one expects in return. Why? Because we look at the level around us that it takes us to have a fairly decent level.
No, that's not why. I may have all sorts of expectations. The question is, what can I do? If someone else is subsidizing my expectations will be far higher. Insofar as the Center for Advanced Study was subsidizing my expectations a few years ago, I refused to work at UCLA for the normal full professor's salary. Why should I, when I can get the same money for being at the Center for Advanced Study with no hours, no duties, and no classes?
Cut off welfare tomorrow. What will they do? What will be their immediate response? At what price to their small children and to their middle-aged children? Yes, they'll get a job. In fact, the statistics show that women, in fact, are the most successful through the employment program. But what has to supplement that typically is the provision of some kind of daycare arrangement. Either the individual woman has to earn enough money to be able to pay privately for her daycare, or in fact she is, quote, subsidized through this insidious corrupting set of programs run by the federal government, which in fact makes her employable and a taxpayer. It's an interesting notion of trying to get people in a productive mode.
Tom Sowell.
It's incredible the way you start the story in the middle, as if there's a predestined amount of poverty, a predestined amount of unemployment, and that the welfare system is not itself in any way responsible for that.
There is a predestined 20% of the bottom half of the population.
I have never, that's always been true.
There's going to be 20% at the bottom.
I agree with you. It's also true that 20% of the bottom population doesn't have to be living on the government and ruled by the government. You mentioned, for example, the female-headed household. Many of those, in addition to the grown woman who has all the kids, are teenage pregnancies. There's not a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy. I grew up in an era when people, and particularly blacks, were a lot poorer than today, faced a lot more discrimination than today, and in which the teenage pregnancy rate was a lot lower than today. I don't believe there is a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy, a predestined amount of husband desertion. Gutman has done a study of the black family showing that this whole notion that the black family has always been disintegrating, that is nonsense, that his studies go up to 1925, the great bulk of black families were intact, two-parent families up through 1925, and going all the way back through the era of slavery. So it is now only within our own time that we suddenly see this inevitable tragedy which the welfare system says it's going to rush in to solve, but which it is itself a part.
We're talking about a very small group. We're talking about 12% of the families are not intact, are not two-parent families at any one period of time.
You mean among welfare recipients?
No,
or the
among the
large?
public at large. We're talking about 12% of the families. 12%.
That's right.
That's a small number. But
Well,
there's
none of
still
those on welfare.
We're still talking about a significant component of the bottom 20% that are the bottom 20%. Whether they are above the poverty line or below the poverty line, they are still the bottom 20%. And the issue is, what is the responsibility of the other 80%, if any, toward those individuals?
Does your program plan to eliminate there being a bottom 20%?
No, but it intends to raise the bottom 20%. So
You're raising them by having more illegitimacy, more unemployment. That's
I'm not
how you're
making them
raising
have illegitimate children. I hope that's clear.
Oh, I think. You don't have to do that. You simply subsidize it.
I hope you're able to catch that at the end. We are subsidizing poor behavior amongst our young people. Um, we are subsidizing it. For instance, one of the key things that I disliked with the Trump administration was increasing the child tax credit, because now you've incentivized uh, people to have more children out of wedlock. Because now you can say that I'm going to be able to get $4,000 per head in the household under a certain age, then I was able to get last time, which was only 2,000 or so. So these child tax credits are horrible incentives, because there is no incentive to encourage families to stay together. There's only an incentive to produce a child. Now, if you were to offer an incentive to encourage the family to stay together, that would be different, because then the child would be more likely to grow up in a positive environment. However, the government has no interest in doing that. The government only has an interest in producing more people to be on welfare so that they can continue to stay gainfully employed and continue to find ways and methods to keep certain people marginally under the rate of poverty and keep themselves gainfully employed and find a reason to raise taxes. That's the only thing that they care about. Let's go find that other one, and then we'll call it a night. Here it is, right here.
I think we're talking across
I could go
purposes.
on. I could go on forever with Dr. Thomas Sowell. Uh, these things are some of the best things that you could ever use for your learning, and I would encourage you to go on your own time and find these, because there's so much that you can learn from them. And I spend most of my days now reading and writing, and I've become sharper and much more wise as a result. And I would encourage others to do the same. The only time that I watch television nowadays is when I get ready to go to bed, or at particular times in the day when I turn on the TV to watch the news in order to keep up with certain things. So, for instance, lately I've been watching the news every day in order to watch the Ketanji Brown Jackson cases, so that I can see what her answers are, so I can make my own determinations as to whether or not I feel as though she's going to make a good impression on the black community. And so far as she has answered these questions, I have found, in my opinion, that she is a disgrace to the blacks and an embarrassment to us, because every answer in which she has given so far has proven that she is nothing more than an accolade for the leftist liberal agenda, and does not care so much for the society or safety of blacks or people within the community. Because if she did, she would not have a recidivism rate as high as she does with the cases in which she has. And she refuses to acknowledge those things, and the media refuses to press her on those things. Even right-leaning Fox News refuses to cover such things, and when they do cover it, they are much less harsh than I would be, because they are afraid of the liberal backlash because of the affirmative action and racial cases that are prevalent whenever you have a black person being grilled or interviewed for any position on Capitol Hill. And it is a shame. But it's not merely a case of black people. It's only black people on the left that receive such a haloed degree of media coverage. If it was a black person on the opposite side, they would not be so friendly, nor would the media be so covering to them. And it is disgraceful and shameful how black people allow this to happen within our own community.
On the one hand, we're talking about results that we're hoping for. On the other hand, we're talking about processes that we're setting in motion. You're saying, should we hope for certain kinds of lessening of inequality and so on? The real question, the political question is, shall we set in motion certain processes because we hope for that, And do those processes enhance or reduce freedom? And I think the argument that Milton is making, certainly the argument that I would make, is that the attempt at doing these things, and it doesn't really matter, it's a complete straw man to talk about absolute inequality. No, not
yes,
at all.
it is,
no.
absolutely. Throughout the film, this is the straw man he brings up in order to say how ridiculous to have absolute equality. And then he goes on to say how ridiculous to have
my whole
absolute
point is,
homogenization as well.
as a result, you see, that you set up processes whose end result may not be any more or less inequality than exists now, but the question is, those processes may indeed reduce freedom greatly. I would go beyond the question of equality and put it more generally, that any process to ascribe any status to any group of people, equality, inferiority, superiority, must necessarily reduce freedom, because whatever the government wishes to ascribe to any group, whatever place, to use the phrase that was very common in the South, that blacks should have their place, whatever place the government is going to assign to people, that place will not coincide, that place will not coincide either with what all those people are doing or with how others perceive all those people, because there's too much diversity among human beings. To maintain any system of ascribed status from the top is going to mean reducing people's freedom across the spectrum. That's the point.
People have an ascribed status. It isn't as if government, by its intervention, creates it. People are born into this world in a given sector of a society, and many, many of them are born at the bottom of the society. The argument about equality of results was an argument that was linked to equality of opportunity.
I want you to pay attention to what she's talking about. She's a political science professor, which is a useless degree because it means nothing, but is an entire program that teaches you how to lie and deceive. But notice what she said, and I'll rewind just a few seconds here, is that she is talking about equality of results. It has gone so far from equality of opportunity or the ability to get people to have the same opportunity to now say that people have to have the same results, regardless of whether their work or the actions in which they took in place to get where they are the same at all. That somebody who's been working for 50 years should be getting paid the exact same as somebody who just started working 2 years ago. That because they work the same position, the same title, they should be having the same result, which is the same pay. That is not fair to somebody who has decided that they were going to give 50 years of their life to a particular career in order to make the amount of money that they make. That is not fair to that person at all. To then have somebody come in who has no skills, or should I say less skills and less experience than he or she who has been doing this job for 50 years, and come in and now start off making pay equivalent to 50 years worth of experience. What lunacy is that? This is the danger of people like this who profess that we must have equality of outcome. That is not constitutionality. That is not fairness.
Many, many of them are born at the bottom of the society. The argument about equality of results was an argument that was linked to about equality of results was an argument that was linked to equality of opportunity. People recognized that unless there was a degree of equality in a degree of enough food, enough security, access to education. Unless these things were available to all children, then equality of opportunity was merely a mockery. That's why equality of results became an issue, and it became an issue for black people in the United States, and they expressed their concern, whatever the opinion
You expressed it, damn it, look. No, they did not. They did not.
They expressed...
Francis, finish it and then reply.
They expressed their will by their extraordinary participation in a protest movement that began in the late 1950s and didn't end until the 1960s. Intellectuals were not in that protest movement.
You want me to answer? You want to keep going?
In that protest.
You want me to answer?
I finished.
Good. Black people have never supported, for example, affirmative action quotas, anything of that sort. Wherever polls have been taken of black opinion on such matters of should people be paid equally or should there be this or that, black people have never taken a position that you described. So it is not a question of what black people chose to do. It's what you choose to put in the mouths of black people. It is what you choose to project. It is not what any black people have ever said anywhere that you can put your finger on.
It's what you choose to put into the mouth of the pollsters, as far as I can see.
I
Look at the leadership of the black community.
Like most people, I have never seen a pollster.
If you look at the leadership of the black...
But I want to go back to I want to carry it back to the earlier point.
Just listen to the difference in dichotomy here, where she is trying to make off as though there has to be some equality of outcome in order for equality of opportunity to mean anything. You cannot force equal outcomes because people are individuals and they will reach set outcomes in their own ways and methods. What you can, however, do is grant them all the same starting place, which is access to the opportunity to pursue whatever end goal that they so desire. Equal access to this, which is why I'm such a proponent and fan of public libraries, because of that access, because everybody has the same starting point there, and there is nothing that is preventing somebody from being able to garner a degree of intellect from the library than is any other person. All they have to do is take advantage of the resources that are allowed to them. And they could go and find whatever outcome they want as a result of that. But what she wants to do is start at the very end and say that you should all be equal at the end of your race in order for you to be equal at the start of the race. That's the equivalent to giving everybody a gold medal that runs in the 500-yard dash. It doesn't say anything for the person who trained the hardest, who practiced the longest, and was able to reach the goal the fastest in order to get that medal when they all started off at the same place. When you will just give them all a medal, regardless of who crossed the finishing line first. You don't do that. That is a detriment to someone's ability to want to do better for themselves. Why should they do better for themselves if you are just going to reward them for inadequacy anyway?
No one.
And now take a listen to Milton Friedman speak. Milton Friedman's also quite wonderful to listen to. And Milton Friedman is not a Republican. He is a libertarian, a classical libertarian. So is Dr. Thomas Sowell, and so is Dr. Walter E. Williams. But their views align more with the Republican Party today, should I say anyway, than do libertarians do today, because conservative values go hand in hand with true libertarianism, because in order to be a liberal or a libertarian, you need to believe in conserved governments that will keep their hand out of personal affairs.
There's no question about what equality of results, if it comes about through a framework of freedom, is a desirable result. Number two, I argue in the film, I've argued here, that in point of fact, you get greater equality of actual results by a system under which people are free to achieve unequal results. That for the poor people of the world that Francis Fox Piven was talking about, the most effective mechanism for enabling them to improve their status is not a governmental program which seeks to ascribe to them certain positions, which seeks to provide them with certain goods and services, but a governmental program which tries to eliminate arbitrary barriers to advancement. I would say that in this world, the greatest source of inequality has been special privileges granted by government. That government, you may talk a great deal, there may be a lot of talk about how we're going to eliminate inequality. But if you go back to your case of Britain, is there any doubt that one of the effects of governmental intervention in Britain has been to create new opportunities for special classes? That the way to get wealthy in a society that supposedly is aiming at equality, that the way to get wealthy is to get a special government permit to to get foreign exchange, or to import goods, or to, in this country, to set up a television station.
You been waiting on me, boo-boo? I'm almost done. Okay, so now that we're done with that, let me go ahead and stop sharing the screen, yeah? As you can see, and she's ready to go to bed. And she's been waiting outside the door, waiting to come on up in here. This is why I don't keep too much stuff on my bed until I get ready to go to bed, because she's getting ready to shed that winter coat. She gets hair everywhere. I gotta get a nice brush for her. But she is always coming to me about 10 o'clock. She's usually ready to go to bed. Here it is, almost 12:30. Come here, boo-boo. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here, boo-boo. You need to go outside too? I'll take you outside before I go to bed. Okay? And so she's spoiled. She's ready to go to bed. She's looking at me like, well, I'll wrap things up. But I just wanted to go over a couple of those things, a couple of issues that I think really needs speaking to. And one of the things that I do is I do a lot of writing. This is one of my many notebooks. And as you can see here, pages upon pages of writing I do all of the time, every single day, writing of multiple different topics, multiple different things, and conclusions and research that I've come up to, several different topics, and I go on and on. I mean, this is an entire notebook and folder of my studies and my writings of things that I've done, and that's just one of them. I have an entire bookshelf over there full of my writings, and I do that because we have to be able to come up with solutions, because what we're doing now is not working. And I'm very disappointed in what I've seen so far of Miss Jackson. And I am hoping that that I will be impressed in the coming days, or as more questioning happens. But so far, I have not been, and so far it has been an embarrassment to Black society, in my opinion. And so, with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this here episode. And this is not going to be on the podcast, so the only way for you to be able to see this one is to join us on the Facebook page, and you'll be able to see this as well as others videos and things that we make that are exclusive to the Facebook page and exclusive to my Facebook page more predominantly. And also be sure to make sure you join us on Spotify, as Spotify is the bulk of where revenues come from, especially considering that I have some financial deals that are still in the works with Spotify for ad revenues and things of that nature, that was able to get monies into the cycle, and will allow me to start to pay the members of my staff that work for me on the podcast. And I want to be able to do that, But in order to do that, I need to be able to have people download and listen to the content on Spotify, as they are the largest proponent to our ad revenue, and that comes from Spotify. You can also be sure to listen to us on Google Podcast. This is another big one that we have. We have several, but the big ones are Google Podcasts and Spotify, which have offered me various ad deals, and I'm going to take advantage of them. So I want to make sure that we can do that. So if you guys want to support our channels and support our YouTube's, not YouTube, our podcast, and the best way to do it is to view it on Spotify and on Google Podcast. Also, always join us on our Facebook page, and you can also join us on our Discord, which I don't have a splash screen for the Discord. I need to make one. But you can also join us there and join in the conversation, because it makes it easier to come up with content and episodes when I know what people are looking forward to. But I also have my own personal goals with the podcast and the episodes that I'm looking forward to making, where there are certain um, things that I'm doing and writing down. I started reading these two books on Frederick Douglass because I wanted to get a massive uh, series together for Black History Month, but because I had to wait so long to get this book off of hold, it held up everything. But I'm still writing that series, and once it's done, I'm going to start recording it, and that series will be added to our Black History series. And it's going to be very, very educational and informative. As I learn, I pass what I learn on to you, so that you can then take the information and make your own determinations on it. With that, I'll see you guys the next time.